In the heart of the savannah, there are laws older than the trees themselves. But today, a king has been silenced by a dark, man-made magic. A loop of cold steel has claimed the sovereign of the plains, and his only hope lies in the hands of a boy who should be his prey. Stay with us as we witness a moment of supernatural trust that will rewrite the history of the wild for Eve. Chapter 1: The Golden Sovereign Snare. The savannah was not merely a stretch of earth, it was an ancient, breathing tapestry, woven with golden threads of grass and punctuated by the gnarled silhouettes of acacia trees. It was a land of old magic and older laws, where the sun sat like a heavy copper coin in the sky, watching the eternal struggle between the hunter and the hunted. Here, every rustle of the wind felt like a whispered secret, and every shadow held the weight of history. The horizon shimmered with a heat that seemed to distort time itself, making the distant hills look like sleeping dragons waiting to wake. At the very heart of this vast dominion lived Leo. He was not just a lion, he was a sovereign, a creature of such immense presence that the very air seemed to thicken and hum around him. His mane was a magnificent, tangled crown of amber and shadow, smelling of sun-baked dust and wild rosemary. His eyes held the deep, knowing amber of a wizard's stone, capable of pinning a rival to the spot with a single, unblinking stare. He walked with a heavy, rhythmic grace, the undisputed master of the plains. On a morning that smelled of scorched earth and the metallic promise of distant rain, Leo was patrolling his borders with the casual arrogance of a king. He felt the steady thrum of the earth beneath his massive paws, a vibration that spoke of a kingdom at peace. He was the protector of his pride, the guardian of the law, and he believed, with the absolute certainty of the powerful, that the world was his to command. To him, the savannah was a loyal servant, providing shade when he was hungry. But hidden within the swaying, silvery grass was a piece of dark, man-made trickery. It was a snare, a cold and soulless loop of wire that lay coiled like a dormant serpent. It didn't belong to the wild, it was a foreign intrusion, a piece of mechanical malice left by those who did not respect the ancient pacts of the forest. The metal was dull and scentless, designed to bypass the legendary instincts of the great cats who ruled these lands. With a single, fateful step, the trap sprung to life. There was a sharp, metallic asterisk clack asterisk, a sound that rang out like a gunshot in the morning silence, scattering a flock of nearby hornbills into the air. A loop of enchanted strength steel whipped upward, faster than a golden snitch, and cinched tight around the king's foreleg. In the space of a heartbeat, the master of the plains found himself tethered to the dirt, his royal progress halted by an invisible, unyielding hand. The shock was immediate, a cold jolt that traveled from his paw to his heart. Leo stumbled, his great head swinging low as he tried to understand why the earth had suddenly bitten back. He pulled instinctively, expecting the obstacle to give way as everything else did, but the wire only bit deeper into his golden fur. The sensation of being held against his will was a foreign poison, a violation of the very essence of his being. He let out a low, questioning growl that vibrated in his chest like a brewing storm. Around him, the savannah seemed to go quiet, as if the grass itself were holding its breath. The insects stopped their chirping, and the wind died down, leaving Leo alone with the cold, biting reality of the steel. He was no longer a hunter, he was a prisoner, caught in a cage with no bars and a jailer with no face. As the sun climbed higher, casting long, accusing shadows across the dirt, Leo's confusion began to harden into something far more dangerous. He realized that this was not a rival to be fought or a prey to be chased. This was a silent enemy, a piece of the human world that had reached out to claim him. The king looked out over his kingdom, seeing the familiar trees and the distant mountains, and for the first time in his life, they felt unreachable. Chapter 2: The Stranglehold of the Wild. Panic, hot and frantic, began to pulse through Leo's veins like liquid fire, melting the regal composure he had spent a lifetime building. He began to thrash with a wild, desperate energy, his powerful muscles bunching and rippling beneath his scarred hide. He lunged backward, hoping to snap the tether by sheer force, but the wire was reinforced with a sinister tenacity. Every frantic movement only served to tighten the loop, making the steel sing a high, cruel note. The mechanics of the trap were relentless and pitiless. Each time Leo gasped for air or threw his weight against the line, the wire cinched a fraction of an inch tighter, as if it were trying to steal the very soul from his body. His breathing became a series of ragged, wheezing whistles that sounded unnervingly like a broken bellows. The blood thundered in his ears, a frantic, rhythmic drumming that heralded the closing of a dark and final door. For long, grueling hours, the king fought a war against an invisible jailer. He tried to gnaw at the metal, but it tasted of rust, bitterness, and a coldness that made his teeth ache. He pawed at the wire, his own talons accidentally drawing blood from his leg in his desperation to find a release. He was a prisoner of his own strength. The more power he exerted, the more the trap demanded in return, turning his greatest asset into his downfall. His roars, which usually sent birds scattering for miles unsilenced. The chatter of monkeys were now nothing more than low, hollow groans. He wanted to call out to his pride, to summon the lionesses who looked to him for wisdom and protection, but the shame of his position kept the sound bottled in his throat. He was a silent sentinel of his own demise, a shadow of the power he once held, fading under the pitiless, white-hot glare of the midday sun. The heat descended like a heavy leaden cloak, stifling and dry, sucking the moisture from his tongue and the fire from his eyes. The sun reached its zenith, turning the golden plains into a shimmering, breathless furnace where the air felt like ash. Leo's thick mane, once his greatest pride, now felt like a suffocating weight, trapping the heat against his skin and dragging his head toward the dust. He was the apex predator, now a spectacle of misery for the world to see. In the distance, a herd of wildebeest paused their migration to stare with dull, vacant curiosity. There was no fear in their eyes now, only a primitive recognition that the order of the world had been upended. The hunter was now the victim, and the Savanna watched on with the cold, indifferent silence of a courtroom. As his strength ebbed away, the sky began to change. Small, dark specks appeared on the horizon, circling in slow, ominous patterns that seemed to shrink with every pass. The vultures, the grim reapers of the wild, were gathering, their keen eyes sensing the transition from life to carrion. They sat in the nearby acacia trees, their hunched shoulders looking like tattered black robes, waiting for the king to draw his final, rattling breath. Leo eventually grew still, his head resting in the dust as his ribs heaved with the monumental effort of existing. He watched the flickering shadows of the vultures dance across the parched earth, a macabre ballet of the end. He was a king, fading away in a patch of dirt that would soon forget his name, ending his reign not with a glorious battle, but with the quiet, metallic snapping of a thread. Chapter 3: The Boy Who Walked Alone. Just as the edges of his vision began to fray into a dull, grey darkness, a figure appeared on the horizon, not a rival lion, and not a scavenger of the sky. It was a young tribesman named Chala, a boy who possessed the quiet, observant spirit of a true forest dweller. He had been tracking the movements of the clouds, looking for signs of the coming rains, when he spotted the unnatural stillness in the valley below. To most, it looked like a resting beast, but Chala knew the posture of despair when he saw it. Chala had known Leo for years, though they had never shared the same patch of shade. He had watched the lion from the safety of the rocky ridges, admiring the way the beast carried the weight of the wild upon his shoulders like a mantle of gold. To the boy, Leo was not just an animal to be feared or hunted, he was a guardian spirit, a living legend that represented the very heartbeat of the world they both inhabited. Any other hunter from the village would have kept their distance, fearing the lion's legendary wrath or the bad luck of a man-made curse. They would have left the beast to the vultures, believing it to be the messy will of the ancestors. But Chala felt a strange, magnetic pull, a tug at his navel that felt like the earth itself was asking for a favor. A heavy weight settled in his chest as he looked down at the fallen sovereign. He began the long, treacherous descent down the rock face, his heart thumping against his ribs like a bird caught in a net. Every step was a dance with death, the loose stones skittering away under his feet like frightened insects. A trapped lion is a creature of pure, volatile instinct, capable of killing with a single reflex swipe of a paw, even at the edge of death. Yet, Chala felt as though he were being summoned by a silent voice. As he reached the valley floor, the air grew thick with the heavy scent of fear and dry earth. He stopped several yards away, his hand tightening around the smooth wood of his spear. Leo heard the intruder, one of his tattered ears flick toward the sound, and with a gargantuan effort, he raised his heavy head from the dust. Their eyes locked, amber meeting brown, and for a moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Looking into the lion's glazed, dying eyes, Chala saw a depth of emotion that no hunter's tale could ever truly describe. It wasn't the blank, predatory stare of a beast, it was a look of profound, exhausted pleading, a silent request for dignity in the final hour. It was the gaze of a warrior who was not yet ready to leave the battlefield, but who had run out of weapons to fight with. Chala knew that approaching was a form of madness that his elders would never forgive. He remembered the stories of men who tried to play at being gods with the great cats and ended up as nothing more than bleached bones in the grass. But to walk away now, to leave this majestic life to be torn apart by the beaks of scavengers, felt like a sin against the very sun that warmed them both. He lowered his spear, placing it gently in the dirt, a silent signal of peace that transcended the barriers of language and species. He reached for the silver-bladed knife at his hip, the steel catching the afternoon light like a shard of a fallen star. With a final, shaky breath, Chala stepped forward, entering the circle of the king's reach, his life now balanced on the edge of a blade. Chapter 4: The Mercy of the Blade. Chala moved into the red zone, that invisible and deadly perimeter where a lion's reflex is usually 10 times faster than a human thought. Leo's eyes followed the boy's every move, his pupils blown wide. His muscles bunching beneath his skin like coiled springs ready to snap. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the possibility of a violent end, yet there was a strange, holy quietude to the moment. But as the boy knelt down, something truly extraordinary happened, something that would be whispered about in the village for 100 years. The lion did not snarl. He did not bide his time to strike with his remaining free paws. Instead, in an act of absolute, supernatural trust, the great beast went perfectly still. He lowered his massive, scarred chin into the dust, exposing the wicked wire that was buried deep within his golden manet. It was a silent invitation, a surrender of his life into the hands of a boy he could have crushed in a heartbeat. Chala's fingers trembled as they came within inches of the lion's muzzle, the heat radiating from the beast feeling like the warmth of a furnace. He could smell the wild musk and the dry, parched scent of the savanna. He reached out and touched the lion's brow, and the beast let out a long, weary sigh. The knife began to saw through the tough, fibrous metal of the snare. The sound of the silver blade against the steel wire was like the snapping of dry bone in the silence of the afternoon. Chala worked with a frantic, focused precision, his sweat dripping onto the lion's fur, mixing with the dust and the blood. He knew he was working against a ticking clock, the lion's heart was slowing with every passing minute. Leo remained as motionless as a stone carving, his amber eyes fixed on the distant horizon as if he were already looking into the next world. He seemed to understand that the sharp sting of the blade near his throat was his only hope for a second chance. He didn't flinch as the wire was manipulated, his trust in the boy becoming a shield that protected them both from the chaos of instinct. One by one, the shackles of the man-made world began to fall away. Chala's hands were stained with the dark, bitter sap of the grass and the rust of the wire, but he did not stop until the final strand was reached. He could see the raw, bruised ring where the trap had tried to claim the king's life, a permanent mark that would serve as a reminder of the day the law was broken. The final strand was the most stubborn, a core of twisted metal that resisted the silver blade with a screeching, metallic defiance. Chala put all his strength into the final cut, his knuckles white against the hilt of his knife, his teeth gritted against the tension. He looked into Leo's eyes one last time and whispered a word of encouragement, a sound of comfort that seemed to soothe the beast. With a final, ringing snap, the tether was severed. The tension that had held the king in a death grip vanished instantly, the wire falling away into the dirt like a dead snake. Chala scrambled backward, his heart leaping into his throat, fully expecting the lion's predatory nature to reclaim him the moment the weight was gone. He watched from the safety of the tall grass, breathless, waiting to see if he had saved a friend or created a monster. Chapter 5: The King's Debt. Leo did not move at first. He lay in the dust, his mouth open, drinking in the cool afternoon air in great, shuddering gulps that made his massive frame tremble. The oxygen flooded his tired muscles, reigniting the fire in his blood and clearing the fog of despair from his amber eyes. He let out a low, raspy cough that shook the very ground, purging the last of the trap's shadow from his lungs. The boy stood ready to flee, his hands empty but his spirit braced for the worst. He watched as the lion's eyes regained their predatory sharpness, the glazed look of the dying replaced by the piercing light of the sovereign. He fully expected the lion to strike, to reassert his dominance over the valley by destroying the witness, to his greatest weakness. But the ancient laws of blood and bone were being rewritten. Leo rose to his feet, a slow and majestic movement that felt like a mountain rising from the plains to meet the sky. He stretched his massive limbs, his bones clicking back into place after the hours of agonizing confinement. He was a force of nature once again, a creature of absolute power who could have ended the boy's life with a single, effortless blow of his paw. He turned his head and looked directly at Chala. It was a long, heavy gaze that seemed to peel back the boy's very soul, acknowledging everything that had passed between them in the silence of the snare. There was no fence between them, no magic barrier. Just two living things standing in the center of the world, acknowledging a moment of profound and impossible grace. Leo took a single step toward the boy, and for a heartbeat, Chala's breath caught in his throat. But the lion did not raise a claw in anger. Instead, in a gesture that defied everything the boy had ever been taught, the king inclined his head in a slow, deliberate bow. It was a royal salute from the master of the plains to the boy who stayed, a recognition of a life saved. A low, deep rumble started in the lion's chest, not a growl of warning, but a vibration that resonated through the earth and into the boy's own heart. It was a sound of gratitude, a frequency of the wild that spoke of a debt that could never truly be repaid in the language of men. The king was marking the boy, not as prey to be hunted, but as a permanent friend of the pride. Then, without a single backward glance, the king turned toward the setting sun. He moved with a renewed, fluid grace, his gold manner catching the dying light until he looked like a creature made of pure, living fire. He walked into the tall, swaying grass, his body blending perfectly into the landscape until he was nothing more than a golden ripple in a sea of amber. Chala picked up his spear and the severed wires, the broken teeth of a silent killer, and watched the horizon until it was empty. He knew that he hadn't just saved a lion, he had touched the very spirit of the world and walked away with his soul intact. A debt of honor had been paid in full under the acacia trees, and as the first stars began to twinkle, the king was home. A debt of honor was paid today under the acacia trees. But what would you have done? Would you have stepped into the reach of the king? Tell us your thoughts in the comments and leave a like if you believe in the power of a second chance. Your support helps us tell the stories of those who have no voice.